Hi, this is Reggie Mara. It's November 7th, 2025. I'm here with the fourth edition of this video series in which I'm speaking about the relationships among historical and current events in the United States of America. This began with an October 23rd video that provided an overview. And in the previous two videos, we've explored what I mean by collective shadow and the role of feminine and masculine energies in the collective shadow of the United States. Um, at the end of the last video, I mentioned that uh, the subjugation of groups and the privileging of groups leads us to a conversation about worldview, specifically developmental worldview. And today we'll do that, and that'll actually complete our overview of the collective shadow of the United States, which, as I've said previously, arises through an unhealthy us or group-centric masculine perspective or energy. And again, that'll make sense, more sense towards the end of this video. More than a half century, more than 50 years of longitudinal studies on adult development have led us to the ability to understand that we do, in fact, as adults, have the ability to continue to develop. And I'm going to speak about what I mean by development, and that is not what I mean, but what the researchers mean in just a moment. We're not talking about developing our ability to hit a golf ball, play the piano, or cook well, all of which are wonderful if they're what floats your particular boat. But we're speaking about that of which we're aware, the ability to develop an awareness that is increasingly deep and broad. And again, I'll get specific in just a moment. So there are various researchers. You can look at Robert Kegan's work. You can look at James Fowler's work, Terri O'Fallon's work. Ken Wilber integrated many of their works into his own overview of human consciousness. Claire Graves, Don Beck, and Chris Cowan researched values and put out a model called spiral dynamics. So any one of those is worth your time. But for the sake of our conversation, I'm going to use a developmental shorthand, 4 stages of development. Very briefly, they are a focus on just myself or a me-centric view, and that's both normal and healthy for toddlers. It's an essential developmental perspective for 1.5, 2.5, 3-year-olds. Okay, it's not great if you're, 69 or 79 or even 32. Pick an age, doesn't matter. Graduation movement from me-centrism into the next one is, we call it group centrism or us-centrism, where I no longer identify just specifically with myself, but I identify with a group, and typically with various groups. If we're fortunate enough to have been raised in a healthy family, our first group tends to be our family of origin. But group centrism includes family of origin, friends on our block growing up, our community, our school, our favorite sports teams, our teammates on sports teams. As we get older, political parties, magazine subscriptions. There are many groups to which we can belong. And group centrism or us-centrism is more inclusive and more comprehensive than just me-centrism. But if we continue to develop, we can then develop into an all of us centrism, or for the sake of humans having this conversation, it's a human-centric conversation. So rather than privileging just my groups, I recognize my interrelationship and my common humanity with all human beings. And that's a very rare developmental worldview on the planet. Many of us can articulate it and recognize that it's possible, but very few people actually live there. And then finally, postgraduate school development is a concern not just with all humans, but with everything and all that is developmental worldview. So I'm concerned with, pick your language, the universe, the planet, creation. I'm not equating those three things, but you get the idea. It's beyond just the human range. Now, these are important because just to take the primary one we're going to speak about, think of any human atrocity at scale that you know of historically. Wars, genocides, starvations, any of that. All of them take place through an us-centric or group-centric developmental worldview. Often, they're led by or initiated by a me-centric individual, but a me-centric individual cannot perpetrate a mass starvation, a genocide, or a Holocaust, or the Holocaust historically, without the help of others. So that's where the group centrism comes in, the us against them worldview, right? So healthy development, the movement from me to us, to all of us, to all that is, right, is a movement into increasingly comprehensive, inclusive, balanced, and complex worldviews. If we're living in an us versus them worldview, which is a binary worldview, there's two things, there's us and there's them. Right? That's a much simpler way to live than if we're living in a human-centric worldview, because we have to then navigate all the different cultures and languages and histories and personalities out there. Or an all that is worldview, when we then have to include the importance, the essential nature of all sentient beings, all living beings, and all the other things that people want to debate are not living. Right? So each developmental move is more complex, more comprehensive, more inclusive, and more balanced. There's a lot more to that, but I'm not going to go into that right now. So the collective shadow, to bring this back to our larger picture here, what we've been talking about in the previous three videos, the collective shadow of the United States emerges through and perpetuates, does both of those. It comes from and it perpetuates a worldview that, number one, is unhealthy. Number two, it's us-centric or group-centric. It's us against them. And it's masculine. Again, it's the unhealthy masculine. So again, the collective shadow of the United States emerges through and manifests as an unhealthy, masculine us-centrism in a virtual absence of healthy feminine energy. And again, to go back to what we've said in previous videos, we're not saying that the United States is unhealthy, masculine, and group-centric. We're saying that the shadow of the country is that. Right? And there's historical and current evidence of it. One of the more striking recent examples, and I'm going to get into the current events in future videos, but one of the really striking recent examples of this is if you listen to what Stephen Miller said. He's a senior advisor to President Trump. What he said during the memorial service for Charlie Kirk. After he got done talking about missing his friend, what he said about pointing to an imaginary you out there, his them, basically, the things he said. It's a stark example of this unhealthy us versus them perspective. There are many other examples, but that's a current one that was very striking to me. So historically, and I'm going to bring this to a close now, this unhealthy masculine us-centrism led to the foundational subjugations of women. Okay, the women were a them. Of indigenous peoples, right? Native Americans were a them. Africans and then African Americans, they were them. And the poor, another example of them. And in honesty, current events, there's been some progress, but all of those groups, women, indigenous peoples, African Americans, and the poor, are still thems for people who are living within and through the shadow of the United States. Okay, this same us-centric, us versus them energy or worldview made possible the Vietnam War and the post 9/11 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, especially in Iraq. But we'll say more about those current events or more recent historical events in the next video. So again, tying together now the interrelationships among unhealthy masculine energy and unhealthy group-centric energy, because you can have a group-centric energy that's healthy. It can be us and them, but we're speaking about the us against them energy, and how those create and perpetuate the shadow of the United States of America here in 2025. So again, this is Reggie Mara. Thank you for being here. It's November 7th, 2025, and I'll see you the next time around.